All right, guys. In this video, we're going to tackle the second part of the Civil War military complex. And in the second half of the Civil War, so the first half did not go so well for the Union. The second half does. We start to see the policies that the North had created, the Anaconda Plan, start to play dividends by this point. The Southern economy is hurting from the naval blockade, but also from the emancipation of slaves in the Confederacy and the freeing of slaves. It is hurting the Southern economy. And on top of that, Confederate states are struggling to provide for their soldiers, and so they're starving. Their families are starving at home. They're starving on the battle lines, and so they start deserting. That's going to wear down the Confederacy. Then you also have two major victories for the North in 1863. One was the Battle of Vicksburg, and this we saw a Union victory that gave them control of the Mississippi River. Remember, that was part of the Anaconda Plan, to split the Union into half, to split it into two. And by taking Vicksburg, they had a firm control of the Mississippi River, and that was a victory led by General Grant. Then you have the Battle of Gettysburg, and this is a very famous one. And this one, the Union stopped a second invasion attempt by the Confederate forces, this time greatly reducing the number of Confederate troops. And from that point on, the Confederates were no longer able to go on the offensive and were constantly in retreat following the Battle of Gettysburg. A major victory. It lasted 3 days. It goes down as one of the most important battles in American history. After this, General Grant will be made the general-in-chief by Lincoln. This is his last general-in-chief. He finally found his guy. Grant aimed to wear down Confederate forces by destroying their supplies. He made this a total war. It was no longer just a war against the troops. It was a war against the Southern economy. They are now actively looking to destroy their resources and their morale. He also was constantly on the attack, always on the attack, using the superiority of his troop numbers against the Confederates. At this point, the Confederates' numbers are really small, and even though he is taking on more casualties with every single attack, he's okay with that because he has more men to spare, and he gets the nickname. The Northern newspapers start calling Grant a butcher. He would lose 60,000 men to Lee's 32,000, but he just kept up the attack because he could afford to lose men and Lee could not. On top of that, he has General Sherman take his spot in the Mississippi River, and William Tecumseh Sherman was then ordered to march from the Mississippi River all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, what became known as Sherman's March to the Sea from 1864 to 1865. And along the way, he just burned a path across the South, destroying towns, fields, and plantations, freeing slaves, and just destroying the morale and the will of the Confederates, burning whole cities to the ground along the way. And this part of this total war. In 1865, after the effects of this total war have been weighing down on the South, causing this famine to go through the South, people going hungry, people dying from disease and hunger. Grant's forces successfully capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. And then shortly after that, General Lee is forced to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, which signaled the very end of the war. And that is it for this video, guys. So what we covered with it, we saw the Union strategy's plan was to suffocate the South through this Anaconda Plan by a naval blockade, controlling the Mississippi River, and then capturing the capital of Richmond. They did this, but it took far longer than they thought it would, and way more lives died than they had anticipated. But thus ends the American Civil War.